commissioners. So we take a little bit of a break, not a real break, just a pause. Thank you very much. And therefore, I will start by giving the floor to the Commission and Commissioner Kubilius to start the debate, please.
Madam Chair, honourable members, first I would like to thank this House for your unwavering support for a stronger European defence. Opinion polls clearly show, in these dangerous times, our people expect Europe to be strong in the world and strong in defence. So I thank you for listening to the voice of the people and leading the people. After nearly 4 years, Russia shows no sign of ending its brutal war. And our American allies' strategic priorities are now in the Indo-Pacific and the Western Hemisphere. They said that very clearly in the National Defence Strategy published 2 weeks ago. And that they expect us to take responsibility for our conventional defence. European responsibility does not mean without NATO. NATO is a foundation of our collective defence in Europe, and essential for our transatlantic ties and our voice in the world. European responsibility means making NATO stronger by strengthening our European posture inside NATO. It means taking care of our own defence needs, led by the Member States, supported by the European Union. For example, we now depend on America for strategic enablers, like space intelligence data or air-to-air refuelling. We need to be ready to replace American strategic enablers with our own European ones. This should be our strategic priority. And we need to be ready to replace other conventional defence resources placed by our transatlantic partners on the European continent. This is the first step towards our independence. European responsibility for defence also demands an institutional framework for our cooperation, an European Defence Union. You ask, how do we build a strong European defence in this current international environment? And my answer is very simple. Ramp up defence production. Ramp up with greater urgency. Ramp up with greater energy than ever before. Our defence industry must now rise to this historic challenge and scale up their production lines and produce. But it sometimes seems as if our industry is not yet ready to face a coming demand shock. So I strongly support the call by President Macron to industry. Please deliver. Please ramp up your production potential and capacity, because that is the goal of our defence readiness. More production power, more innovation, stronger deterrence. And the biggest dividend is peace. And I call on all defence ministers, inform us if you experience delays in delivery. We need to understand what causes delays and how to tackle them, so industry can count on our full support. And we support industry very concretely. Last week, I held the first meeting of the Security of Supply Board, which will monitor supply chains so industry can deliver at scale and speed. And soon I will go on a missile tour to engage with Member States and industry how to best accelerate missile delivery to Ukraine and to our own stockpiles. This is European Union added value in practice. Last year, we prepared the ground for defence ramp-up with new defence policies and a massive defence financial big bang. 150 billion in safe loans. We have now endorsed 16 out of 19 national investment plans and sent them to the Council for approval. Member States will spend 6.8 trillion euros on defence by 2035 if they will fulfil their NATO pledges. And now on the table, a 60 billion euro loan for Ukraine's defence. The Commission is in full preparation mode. So I call on you, give your green light for the Ukraine loan so we can start implementation. The loan is built on a cascading principle to buy first from Ukraine, the European Union, and our EEA and EFTA partners, and only after that from abroad. So if industry cannot deliver, Ukraine can go to world markets. And Ukraine needs these weapons now. Defense ramp-up will not only benefit our defense, but also our competitiveness. I know you have a big debate on competitiveness tomorrow. Mario Draghi said, marginal reforms will not restore competitiveness. Only massive coordinated investment supported by EU instruments, up to €800 billion in additional investment per year is needed. That is exactly where we can bring strategic added value for our competitiveness with our defense spending, which during the next 10 years can on average reach almost €700 billion annually. A massive boost for our competitiveness, but only if it is spent properly. Mario Draghi also clearly warns, spend it in a fragmented way, spend it outside Europe, and that would undermine our competitiveness. And it would also harm our defense. Europe faces a decisive choice in defense. Act divided and damage our competitiveness, or act united and make defense spending the engine of our economy. So we are saying to member states, coordinate, set priorities, not only national but also European, fully in line with NATO. Use new possibilities in EDIP, in European Defence Industrial Programme, to create European defence projects of common interest, our defence flagship projects, that no member state can build alone, but that protect the entire Union. For example, the Eastern Flank Watch, flagships on drones, air defence, missiles and space. Honourable members, as Jean Monnet predicted, the European community will be born out of a crisis. The current security crisis is also making us stronger. The European Union is historically an economic giant. When it comes to defence, the European Union is also a giant, but a sleeping giant. In this world of giants, we too must be giants, true to our values and strong. Dear friends, let us together wake up the sleeping giant of Europe. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And I will already start by warning you, because we are under time pressure. We have a formal sitting after this debate, and therefore we don't have that much time. So I first and foremost, please ask you to stick to your speaking time. And secondly, during the next speaker, you have a chance to ask for catch the eye, but I already have far too many, and I will close it after the first speaker, and I will just let you know that not everyone will be able to speak during catch the eye as well. So the first speaker is Mr. Nicolas Pascual de la Parte for 1.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and thank you very much, Commissioner, for your readout. I think that, as you have said, Europe finds itself in a real crossroad concerning security and defense, out of different reasons, but mainly because we have to set up a credible deterrence against Russia for future possible military adventurism, and because we have to reset the European link on new basis, on an equality basis. So far, the European link with the US has been a relationship of dependency, and it is not possible anymore. It's unsustainable. The new Transatlantic link has to be based on reciprocity and equality, and that's why we need a European Union of Defence, a European Union that is capable of taking the future in its own reins. And that means a single market for defence. That means a European industrial and technological base, as you have said, Commissioner. And above all, we have to reform also our architecture and our decision-making processes so that we can have, at the end of the day, a European headquarters, a European command and control change, a military integrity change, and we are able to take our own decisions. It will be taken along the year 2026 and 2027. We have already agreed upon the political and strategic framework, and now we have to deliver on concrete and possible work strands, whether military mobility, whether it is the drone wall, space defense, and missile defense. We have the need of speed, of decision, of strategic capacity, and democratic accountability. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, also for sticking to the time. The next speaker is Mr. Maniatis for 1.5 minutes, please.
Dear Chair, dear Commissioner, If we want the EU to have a say in the geopolitical developments and be in a position to protect all of its citizens from Greenland, Finland and Estonia down to Greece and Cyprus, we need to have an autonomous, united and sovereign European defense. We see geopolitical balance changing daily. We can no longer be dependent upon others. The issues of national security and the national security strategy of the US are there. The messages are clear. We can no longer ignore them. So we need to move forward with the necessary steps so that if and when the need arises, we will be able to act on our own. And of course, that means that the European Defence Clause has to be defined. Solidarity between member states will not just be wishful thinking, but it needs to be something real, actual help. We recently heard the Secretary General of NATO say that it is a utopia to think that the Europe can protect herself. On the contrary, dear Secretary Gentleman, what is utopia is just keep raising defense spending without having more cooperation. And we cannot rely on someone who often sees us not as an ally. So we need to have an EU that will be able to see the other world powers eye to eye. Thank you very much.
Very much. And the next speaker is Mr. Bartela for 2 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Monsieur le
Thank you, President. Commissioner. 1 minute to midnight, and Europe stands poised on the brink. After decades of peace, the return of war to our continent and imperialistic logic throughout the world is a reminder. Power has never disappeared. We've simply stopped looking it in the face. The war of aggression carried out by Russia, coupled with the election to the presidency of Donald Trump, have highlighted our failures, but also your naivety when it comes to defense. This is no pretext, may I state, to creating an EU army. An army is the expression of national sovereignty, the condition for its survival, the heir to its sacrifice. An EU army would mean the watering down of France's sovereignty in a federalist project which our people reject. The emergency is elsewhere. It's about us being able to produce what will guarantee today and tomorrow our security, our safety. Europe must set up a European preference when it comes to defense. A nation that is not in charge of its weapons is at the mercy of that which produces its weapons. This is about defending a new European architecture. It's about the EU placing at the heart of its priority national sovereignty, far from the weighty red tape of the Commission that is trying to take on a competence that does not belong to it. We need to change the way that we're doing things, change the track that we're on in order to take our destiny in hand. And so some major choices have to be made and defended together today and tomorrow.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Mr. Posniaks for 1.5 minutes, please.
Madam President, Commissioner, dear colleagues, as Commissioner has already said, we are not at war, but neither are we at peace. That's why Europe's defence today is shaped by far more than peacetime considerations. In the current security environment, it's not only the quality of weapons that matters, but our ability to produce them quickly in sufficient quantities and our ability to adapt and mobilize. Defense capability now extends well beyond the traditional defense industry. Every manufacturing sector, every welding machine, soldering iron is part of it. We have a duty to remove the barriers that limit civilian industry's contribution to Europe's defence capabilities. Defence is not just military production, it's the entire industrial ecosystem. Independence from external suppliers is important, but whether we like it or not all materials critical to defence can be sourced within Europe. Therefore, we need our strategic partners that can lower the risks to our supply chains, industry and security. And finally, defence capabilities are not defined by the number of weapons, but by the willingness to use them. We still have a choice: provide these weapons to Ukraine today, or wait until they are needed here. Ukraine's victory over the aggressor is what will make Europe safer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Ms. Loiseau for 1 minute, please.
Madam President, Commissioner, never has the construction of a European defence has been so urgent and anticipated by our citizens. Russia doesn't want peace in Europe or Ukraine, and we have Islamism in Africa and elsewhere. The EU-US isn't reliable. They're getting closer to Russia. So we can only count on ourselves, and we can only be secure if we're united. We have to fight against the pseudo-nationalists who, against all logic, say that we'd be stronger if we were divided. We have to combat the pacifists every day who said that by refusing to defend ourselves, we wouldn't be attacked. Without Hungary or Slovakia or the Czech Republic to help Ukraine. And here in the European Parliament, unfortunately, the NATO Secretary General talked about dreamers, those who refuse our strategic defence. If we have an American partner, talked about relying on the US, who we can't rely on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Statsis for 1 minute, please.
Dear colleagues, I once sat next to the wealthy American who taught me about the new concept, FU money. It's not about riches, it's about ability to sometimes say no, to walk away from your dead-end job and control your own future. And right now, Europe does not have that kind of privilege. Around 80,000 US troops are stationed here, forming a pan-European security force. We are grateful for this. It really strengthens European as well as American security. But what if one day they leave and Europe has no real answer? That isn't strategic autonomy, that isn't strategy at all. That's why Europe needs what I call FU defense, the ability to stand on its own. This starts with being able to build our own European rapid reaction force, around 100,000 troops, fully aligned with NATO. Not because we want to stand alone, but because we must be ready for it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Potenga for 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Madam President, Commissioner, colleagues. In 10 years, military spending in Europe has exploded, doubled. You're talking about 7 trillion euros for the war. But with a budget above that of Russia and virtually every other country, we cannot defend ourselves. Are we completely incompetent? If the money is to defend ourselves, why are we buying armed vehicles designed for the Sahara? In 2025, Rheinmetall guaranteed over 700 billion euros to its shareholders. Now, why is our taxpayers' money financing the shareholders of these firms? The US is turning over on over invoicing for particular items. That's a real problem. You're here to deal with this, not to profit shareholders of companies.
Is Mr. Neuhoff for 2 minutes, please.
Colleagues, a common security and defence policy in the EU. There's never been such a thing. When the Ukraine war, when we talked about, when it became serious with defence, it wasn't the EU that acted, it was a coalition of the willing. A handful of EU states with some non-EU states. And that's no coincidence. A true common defence policy was never necessary because all relied on NATO. And there was a good reason. Only NATO has, because of the US, the military assets to provide real deterrence. So, how could a strengthening of the EU defence in a more unstable international environment with more powers for the EU, by even more concentration of power and regulation from Brussels? If you're serious about the defence of Europe, this won't be done by the EU. What we need is the opposite, a clear institutional division between European Union and European defence. What we need is our own independent body, an alliance of states that are prepared to deliver, to bring their capabilities together, and which will strengthen NATO as a European pillar. But if the EU, when it comes to protecting its external borders, when it's failed so miserably, shouldn't look to the much bigger task of military defence. Colleagues, every change starts with thinking. If you want to rethink Europe, you must have the courage to open the European treaties and renegotiate them. Yes, the Title 5 of the TEU is one of the things that we need to be taking a close look at.
Here is Mr. McAllister for 1.5 minutes, please.
Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, the European Union has achieved decisive progress towards taking more responsibility for its own security over the last decade. We have created some necessary tools to do so. Initiatives such as PESCO, the European Defence Fund, EDIRPA, or SAFE, just to name a few, have put us in a stronger position to develop and strengthen our own security and defence capabilities. In addition, we have developed a complementary strategy outlined in the White Paper for European Defence and the Defence Readiness Roadmap 2030. So from my point of view, Commissioner Kubilius, you are on the right track. But, dear colleagues, these tools and strategy alone are of course not enough. The time for Sonntagsreden, as we call it in German, sunshine speeches, is simply over. Now is the time to deliver on the promises we have made to our citizens and to our partners. The Member States must now close their capability gaps, improve their coordination and significantly increase their defence investments. This requires political will, sustained commitment and a sense of urgency. We can no longer wait. If Europe fails to meet this challenge, we will continue to be caught unprepared, as recent weeks, months and years have clearly shown. Preparing for what comes next means strengthening Europe's defence capabilities, protecting our sovereignty and preserving our independence now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Mr. Mixer for 1 minute, please.
Commissioner, President, dear colleagues, on Ukraine's battlefields, our European values and our freedom are being defended as we speak here. So it's absolutely imperative that we provide the brave Ukrainian fighters all the support they need. At the same time, external threats to EU member states' security and territorial integrity are not theoretical or hypothetical either. This means we also need real and usable military capabilities to deter and, when necessary, defeat any aggressor. Over the past 8 years, we have built strong alliances around the Western Hemisphere, which, let's be honest, have allowed us Europeans to underspend on our own defence. The stark reality is that some of those alliances appear less reliable today than they have been over the past several decades. And the implication is clear and unavoidable. We must urgently build up our own autonomous European defence capability. Moreover, we must also have not only operational autonomy, but defence industrial sovereignty. In times like this, obviously, we must speed up production and shorten the innovation cycle in defence. But first of all, we need to put our money where our mouth is and provide in both member states and also common EU budget adequate financial resources to implement our capability initiatives as well as our defence industrial programs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Ms. Brückner for 1 minute, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, Mr. Commissioner. The security of Europe must be based on strong armed forces of sovereign nations and not the European Commission taking away yet more competencies. The issue of defence cannot be the subject matter of experiments such as a common European army. The main element of the security is cooperation of most EU member states in NATO structures. There is no need to duplicate the role and competencies of the pact. The more decisions stay in the hands of the European Commission, the more trouble the European member states have. The European Commission must stop instrumentally uses security for exerting political pressure. Funds for defence cannot be blocked for ideological or political reasons, and this is what happened vis-à-vis the Hungarian government to impact the parliamentary elections that are approaching. This is acting to the detriment of Europe. All the governments should meet the planned commitment of 5% of GDP for defence.
Okay, thank you. We will continue with the speakers list. The next speaker is Mr. Dworczyk for 1 minute, please.
Madam Chair, Mr. Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, I'll start with the obvious. Unfortunately, some European politicians want to replace by illusions. European security and safety is based on independent armies and the NATO. Until 2022, this was the description of reality. Today, however, some are worried about it, and this is a pretext not to protect Europe. Why? Because in Brussels, more and more people talk about a European army. This is satisfactory to federalists and some EU civil servants. From the perspective of the eastern flank member states, it is something very dangerous due to duplication of structures with NATO and undermining security structures, which is crucial for countries of my region. Presenting a EU army is a side topic, replacing the obvious one for people who do not want to take responsibility for security. Today, we need to fulfill the requirements within NATO and build capacities where they are most needed on the eastern flank, and not come up with political solutions that only seem to come up with a solution. A blue card? No, then.
Speaker is Ms. Strack-Zimmermann for 1 minute, please.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Commissioner, don't forget Ukraine. Look, every day what's happening there is the scenario that threatens us, and we shouldn't look away. The people don't want to be praised because of their courage and ability to defend themselves. They want support. And there are nice interviews by heads of state and tell us what the EU can do. It's better to do something. We need air defence, arms, missiles that protect people, and the Europeans have the right for us to protect them. Together, we must be faster, together, more coordinated in our work. And don't listen to the nationalists, also not in this chamber. Europe can only protect Europe together. It's about us. Whether it comes to technology, new jobs, it's important that not just the big countries, but all the smaller European partners are included. We need a security-relevant defence single market. We must be independent, in particular, from the US. Commissioner, you're on the right track, and you have our support.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. van Lansroot for 1 minute, please.
Keep dreaming, Mark Rutte said. If you think Europe can ever defend itself without the US, keep dreaming. Sure, we were asleep for too long, but this vision leads nowhere. Centuries ago, the Netherlands was 7 little provinces, surrounded by threats, too weak to stand against them, dependent on protection from unreliable allies. And these 7 provinces united and created the Dutch army. What if they hadn't? Because Dutch army sounded scary, or because people without a vision told leaders, keep dreaming. If they had listened, the Netherlands would not be here today. Colleagues, I don't give a how we call it. A European army, a European defense union, the European soldier sorority for all I care, as long as we get it done. We need autonomous defense with European command, capabilities and forces. This is not a dream, it's a plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Grasoulis for 1.5 minutes, please.
The chairman has urged, let us wake up the sleeping giant of Europe. The EU member states have promised by 2030 to allocate at least 5% to defence from their budgets. But according to the data of 2025, 5 EU member states, the small ones, hadn't allocated even 0.5%. 11 EU member states allocated around 2% for defence. And only 5 countries, including Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, Greece, allocated more than 5% of their GDP to defence. It is highly difficult to wake up a giant, but it is a giant. And if one country allocated even all of its budget, no matter how small it is, that wouldn't tackle the problem of defence. Europe needs solidarity, and it lacks solidarity. If we looked at war in Ukraine now, we are blaming US for doing little, but Europe is doing even less. Look at Trump. He urges India not to buy Russian oil, while we are signing the free trade agreement with India without even raising this obligation to renounce Russian oil. Let us be united and principled. Thank you.
Inish for 1 minute, please.
Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, Jacques Delors said Europe is going to be social or nothing. With the gigantic arms race for 800 billion euros, von der Leyen is sounding the death knell for social Europe. The Commission is sticking to NATO, but NATO is nothing other than a US instrument of power. It's just about US interests. Greenland showed us what this means. The Commission cannot deny reality here. With Greenland, Ms. Callas and von der Leyen are talking about international law, but they don't care about anything else. But what about the blockade of Cuba, which is destroying the economy and leading to regime change? Nothing, not a peep from the European Commission, which is shameful. Make sure that the Cuban people, make sure they don't starve at the hands of Donald Trump. Thank you.
Next speaker is Mr. De Meo for 1 minute, please.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Over the past few days, the Winter Olympics have been taking place, and Russian hackers have been attacking the Italian institutions. Wars are being fought not only with tanks and weapons, but in a hybrid manner, striking at data and essential communication services, jeopardizing our institutions and indeed our democracy. That's why our action must not stop at weapons. It's about investing in security, in protecting our systems and our decision-making capacity. This is not an ideological choice. It's a political responsibility if we wish to protect our citizens, our freedom and our economy. A more responsible Europe when it comes to security is not an alternative to NATO. It's about contributing to its efficiency, about preventing crises and making the alliance more solid as a whole. A united Europe that's aware of its geopolitical role will be a credible actor on the international stage, and that is how we must proceed.
Next speaker is Mr. Pizzula for 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Commissioner, dear colleagues. In times like these, we need to strengthen European pillar of NATO and advance our long...
U ovim vremenima moramo raditi na jačanju evropske strateške autonomije, moramo raditi na odvraćanjima, moramo imati zajedničke
Since January 2025, US military assistance to Ukraine has dropped sharply. That's why our responsibility for the European security architecture is even more important. Any deal on Ukraine that fails to respect Ukrainian resilience or ignore Russian aggression would be deeply harmful, not only for Ukraine but for Europe as a whole. Furthermore, we need to support investments and measures to back defense cooperation, including with like-minded partners. Finally, regardless of the outcome of the upcoming US midterm elections, we must anticipate future developments in transatlantic relations and plan accordingly. It's vital to act strategically rather than react under the pressure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Tierney for 1.5 minutes, please.
Monsieur le Commissioner, colleagues, let's see it clearly. There's no debate on European European defence without talking about NATO. From the start, there has been an exclusive thing. Many just talk about defence between Europeans, and that there's a risk of losing the Americans and losing the alliance. What can sink NATO is weakening it. The Greenland crisis showed two things. The US want to preserve their freedom of action, and they don't want any alliance to hold back their interests. And the Americans talk about a Atlantic community and the pushing it back against China and not Russia. What can we do for ourselves and our common interests? We have to have the critical capacities for our national armies, and we are too dependent still on the Americans. Yes, we have to have a European pillar within NATO, but the structures and the capacities won't be enough if they are not put at the service of a conceptual service. We need to rethink our defence in Europe, taking into account our specificities, which makes that we have a different model than the European federal model, and we have to have confidence in our officers, our soldiers, researchers, and our peoples. No one will organise our defence for us, and let's not let anybody think our defence for us.
Bino for 1 minute, please.
Chair, Commissioner Kubilius, colleagues, the international context has changed structurally with the Russian war of aggression in Ukraine, instability in the Mediterranean, global competition. That means that we have to address European security with realism, without ambiguity as well. We need to strengthen European defence. That doesn't mean that we should reject diplomacy, but it means we have to live up to our own responsibility to protect our own citizens, our interests, and our own freedom. The member states are responsible for their own decisions for security, but Europe needs to be more capable in terms of supporting international forces to act together. No country can do it on its own. We need to have a credible defence which is built on industrial programming for defence, which isn't going to be done by 2030, but we need to guarantee a solid manufacturing basis with the ability to manufacture goods in appropriate timeframes. These are the conditions for a more secure Europe, a more credible Europe, which is a credible pillar of the Transatlantic alliance.
Yes, Mr. Austravicius for 1 minute, please.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner, dear colleagues, it's time to acknowledge that Even the highly increasing individual member states' investments for defence will not achieve what can be achieved by the coordinated EU actions on the EU and NATO level. Europe cannot pretend and expect that the bill for its defence will be paid by somebody else. That lasted for too long. Therefore, we need a new EU defence strategy. We need to think about the security and defence Europeisation, which will not deny the NATO defence cooperation, but will contribute to it significantly. Currently, we are discussing as to whether Europe on its own would be capable to ensure the security of the continent. That does not mean the standardization of the equipment, defense equipment, etc. First of all, this is the uniform ambition, leadership and responsibility for the nearest future. Only this will ensure the security of the Europeans, not on paper, but in real environment. Thank you.
Speaker is Mr. Terras for 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Madam Vice President, Commissioner, dear colleagues. It's almost 4 years of Russian full-scale war against Ukraine. I see no end of this soon. Global developments around us place increasing responsibilities on European countries for ensuring their own security and defence. Europe must primarily focus on increasing its defence budgets and developing its industry, to such extent that we can build up defence capabilities ready to deal with the threat facing us. If the NATO European allies would reach 5% commitment today, we will have more than 1.2 trillion euros defence spendings altogether. We have to spend this money wisely. Today, there are no signs of NATO disintegration. The majority of US decision makers I met last week consider NATO and security cooperation with Europe to be vital to US interests. But we must prove that we take our part of the deal seriously. Our primary task is to invest to our defence and increase Europe's military readiness. Thank you.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, we are really under time pressure due to the formal sitting afterwards, so I ask you to try to stick to your speaking time. The next speaker is Mr. Reuten for 1 minute, please.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, colleagues. The answer to strengthening our sovereignty and security is simple: more Europe, not more slogans. Last month, we adopted here a clear agenda for concrete action, which I know you support. We must stop dressing up national reflexes as strategy. Fragmentation is an expensive weakness. You said it, Commissioner. But member states are not even close to understanding the urgency, so it seems. What do we need? First, political courage and operational doctrine to act, not after the next crisis, but now. Second, make Article 42.7 real. Third, build EU command and control, autonomous if needed. Fourth, fix decision-making. No unanimity traps, no defense planning by Council working groups. And fifth, spend together, a European DARPA also, and EU-owned strategic enablers. Contrary to the member states, you said it also, Commissioner, our citizens understand the urgency, and we have a clear recommendations in this regard. My question is, will we finally care whether member states actually listen? Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Hölveni for 1.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tisztelt képviselőtársaim, amit most látunk, az egyszerűen kapkodás.
Yes, dear colleagues, President, what we can see is that we seem to be grabbing here and there, but I think that we really do have to develop our capabilities long term. The 21st century for Europe, well, we know that NATO is necessary, regardless of the problems, difficulties we face. And I don't think we ought to establish a link of dependence to the aggression in Ukraine. We have to respect the victims of Ukraine, but Europeans' defence policy should not depend on a country that is currently at war. Preparation, yes, but not preparation for war. We should prepare for peace and not for any kind of escalation. So this endless financing of the war is not a strategy, but self-deceit and business. And we can't find ourselves in a situation where the continent is ruining itself financially. We cannot afford to continue to finance this war at the expense of the next generation, because, of course, this is only undermining our competitiveness. A European Union that is using up all its reserves, its own reserves, cannot prepare for long-term peace. So we cannot allow our peace in Europe to be based on an external conflict and shirk our responsibilities. So what we have to do is increase our own military capability.
Yes, Mr. Vondra, for 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes, the international conditions have been changing dramatically. Michael Carney in Davos was true about one thing. The military and economic power will play a much greater role than simply respecting the rules of the game. We need to adapt to the new reality. We must not simply be sad like a brontosaurus who sees a comet hitting the Earth. We need to strengthen ourselves to gain respect and not be laughable. We must not waste our time on endless debates on reforming the institutions. We must not simply sew new uniforms, but we also must not undermine NATO. What we do need to do is to build its European pillar. We need to spend more on defense. We must strengthen rather than weaken our own industry. We need to gain access to raw materials. And most importantly, we still need our allies. Mark Rutte is right. When faced with a choice of the US, Russia and China, despite all the rhetorics of Mr. Trump, Washington is our closest ally.
Take a blue card. Mr. Vondra, do you want to take a blue card? Okay. So this is the only blue card I will allow in this debate due to the time constraints, and the floor is given to Ms. Friis, seat 32.
Thank you. I just can't help but wonder, when you say it's important for the EU not to undermine NATO, I think that the one person who's undermining NATO right now is not sitting in this chamber, but in the White House in the US. The biggest threat to NATO at the moment seems to be coming from within. So how do you see that it's not in this house that we're undermining NATO, it's from the US, and I think the situation in Greenland, frankly, tells us all about where the threat is coming from, unfortunately. I wish it was different, but it's the reality we must face.
Mr. Vondra?
A great British Arnold Toynbee, he was in fact on the left, and he developed the concept of challenge and response. And our response is more important than this rhetorical challenge by Trump. You know, our response should be to develop a stronger part of NATO on the European soil, because this is to protect us, the organization. So really, to spend more money for defense, to develop the industrial base, and not to make it weaker by your Green Deal.
Thank you. Thank you. No, thank you. So, Sigrid, Ms. Friis, we will stop this now. We are really on the time constraint, so that was the last blue card. The next speaker is Ms. Henriksson for 1 minute, please.
Yes. Madam President, Commissioner, it's time to see the world how it is, not as we wish it to be. The rules-based international order is under attack. President Trump's threats against Greenland and Denmark have shown that we can no longer rely on the United States in all circumstances. Therefore, Europe must go from words to action. We must strengthen our defense, reduce our dependence, and build a functional internal market for defense equipment. And we must also strengthen the European pillar in the NATO. Putin's ambition to draw Ukraine into Russia's sphere of influence must not succeed. For Ukraine's and Europe's future, it's crucial that Ukraine becomes a member of the European Union. And the defense omnibus that we are currently working on, Mr. Commissioner, it's important. And coming from Finland, I think that we all have to step up in our member states. All member states have to do more. There is no time to lose.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Zuido Alvarez for 1 minute, please.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Commissioner, during the Second World War, the British mathematician Alan Turing developed a method to decode communications, Nazi communications that talked about their maneuvers. Thanks to that, Allies could preempt what the Axis was going to do because they knew perfectly well the ins and outs of the conversations. Last week, Russia intercepted at least 12 European satellites that were used for government communications and military communications across Europe. In other words, Putin accessed intelligence or confidential information of EU governments. At the same time, there are mass cyber attacks against military and political leaders, ministers across the EU, and senior officials in the EU. This kind of hacking would have affected messages shared at a very high level. So this is a warning. We have to boost cybersecurity, and it has to be a priority. If we want intelligence to be protected, it has to be our first line of defense. Thank you.
Apologies, colleagues. Mr. Kremer is the next speaker for 1 minute, please.
Colleagues, for too long we have treated defense as somebody else's problem, kept it outside of European integration, allowed for fragmentation, weakness and dependency. Today, we are paying the price. Politically, when we are not at the negotiating table but on the menu. Militarily, when it's not just Ukraine but our own soldiers waiting for equipment that arrives too little and too late. And financially, when fragmented procurement means that we are paying 30% too high prices at times when European families are struggling to make ends meet. This, colleagues, is unacceptable, and it is unworthy of the second biggest economy in the world. Europe deserves better. So let's finally stop talking and start acting by creating a real European defence union, where we have the power to protect our way of life, where we pool procurement and spend not just more but better on defence, where we create a true single market of defence, where we have maximum security at maximum value for money, and where we democratise our decision-making so that single veto players cannot stop security for all. Colleagues, today Europe still faces a choice between independence and irrelevance. Let's choose independence before it's too late. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Ms. Steger for 1 minute, please.
Aufrüstung, Aufrüstung.
Relvastumine,
Rüstungskonzerne und noch mehr Macht für Brüssel. So kann man die Sicherheitsstrategie der Europäischen Union zusammenfassen. Sie betreiben Angst- und Panikmache und wollen zig Milliarden, großteils auf Pump, in die Rüstungsindustrie stecken, um so endlich ihr großes Ziel einer Verteidigungs- und Schuldenunion zu erreichen, mit noch mehr Kompetenzen für Brüssel. Sie wollen das Einstimmigkeitsprinzip, das Vetorecht der Mitgliedstaaten abschaffen. Sie wollen eine EU-Armee und, was natürlich in einer europäischen Sicherheitsstrategie auch nicht fehlen darf, ist die bedingungslose Solidarität mit der Ukraine. Völlig absurd, vollkommenen Machtrausch verfallen.
But the translation is not working, so we just need to make sure that the English...
Can you hear the English interpretation?
Can we make sure that does it work now?
Can you hear the English interpretation?
Thank you and apologies.
Die europäische Sicherheit.
The European security policy, armament, 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 even more weapons, even more billions into the defence industry, and even more power for the European Union. And that is what the European security policy looks like. You're spreading anxiety and worry. You want to pump billions into the defence and armament industry in order to achieve your great aim of creating a defence and debt policy. You want to have more powers in Brussels, do away with the member states, and you want to have this European security policy. And of course, we still have to support Ukraine. It's totally absurd because it would appear that basically you're just on a power rush. So the security strategy, basically you want to arm without any kind of reality. And all of this is a burden for the European citizens. What the European citizens want, the people in the street, you don't seem to be bothered about that at all. So what about the European peace policy? I think Europe is going to is far more uncertain about its own policies, and you're just escalating rather than thinking about peace. The idea is to de-escalate, protect the borders, and strengthen the member states, and that's how you get peace. Thank you.
The next speaker is Mr. Bai for 1 minute, please. Please, order.
In an international context that is increasingly chaotic, the European peoples are waiting for Europe to affirm sovereignty over its nation. Building more solid European defences does not mean building a federal army outside of our territory. Our force relies on our sovereignty. We need to be masters of our strategic choices and our borders. All useful European cooperation should respect these fundamental principles. Our common aims should be to protect the continent, fight drug trafficking, terrorists, cybersecurity, and protect critical infrastructure. We cannot speak seriously about defence whilst having uncontrolled influxes threatening our security. Europe needs to cut ties with its excessive dependence, be that strategic or industrial, and anchor itself in European nations. A free Europe can act when necessary, protect its people and respect their identities. This is the only credible way to have effective and legitimate European defence.
The next speaker is Mr. Erulu for 1 minute, please.
Sehr geehrte Frau Vizepräsidentin, sehr
Dear Vice President, Commissioner Kubilius, from peace you learn how to be able to defend yourselves, and there are certain member states that have realised that they are going to have to invest more in defence. They saw this 2024, 2025, and did so to the tune of about 7 billion. We can't have member states in the European Union that are not that are placing obstacles in the path of the European internal market, which means that there are others who have to pay more for the armaments defence products. We know, of course, that as a result of the Russian aggression in Ukraine, the defence and security landscape has changed. We have to modernise our defence industry, and we need NATO as a partner because we can learn from them. Mr. Kubilius, I wish you all good luck and strength. Do go along to the European Council on Thursday and tell the member states that they cannot do anything other things have to change. They've got a strong ally in the European Parliament, and the member states have to understand that we have to have a modern defence system.
Very much. The next speaker is Ms. Zufko for 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Madam President, Commissioner Kubilius. Europe is facing the most challenging security environment since the end of the Cold War. Russia's war against Ukraine is a part of a broader and long-term strategy aimed at destabilizing Europe and confronting the West. This reality demands a clear shift in how we think and act on European defense. Building a stronger European defense means moving from declarations to real capabilities. Europe remains too dependent on others in key areas, too fragmented in defense industry, and too slow in decision-making. At the same time, we are still not sufficiently integrating the hard lessons learned from Ukraine into our own defense planning. Deterrence must be credible. That requires not only defensive resilience, but also the ability to act decisively, including long-range and operational capabilities. Defense is not only a military issue, it is about industrial capacity, civil preparedness, resilience of our societies, and political leadership. Europe must take greater responsibility within NATO, strengthen joint procurement.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Cepeda for 1 minute, please.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Commissioner Kubilius, thank you very much for trying to work hand in glove with us in order to wake up the European giant. But if we are to wake the giant, then we need to have a very clear political commitment. Let me explain. What does it depend on to go towards a federal and smart system? It depends on a political decision. What about a military satellite network? Because we have Star Wars going on. That all hinges on a political decision. What about a strong defense shield, because look at what's happening on the internet. Again, if we're to have this depends on a political will, if we are to join forces. But without this political decision, we won't be able to defend Europe. If tomorrow there weren't to be a threat, but an actual attack on European soil, who would respond and how? So the European Commission has to come up with a response, has to come up with a reply. That's how we're going to help wake up the giant. Thank you.
Busade Villalba for 1.5 minutes, please.
Gracias.
Thank you. Building a European defence is not the same as building a high-rise building or creating an emergency fund. We've spent decades chipping away at what morals, family life means, and you have disdained everything in this respect. We've handed over our defence to the US. We've reduced our expenditure for military expenses. We have done away with military service, and we've spent decades trying to control our populations and letting millions of foreigners in who either hate us or identify us as the enemy. Multicultural society means that many no longer know who is friend and who is enemy. The European Union has never been, cannot be, should never be a military alliance. That's why we have NATO. A real soldier doesn't fight because he hates who is in front of him. It's because he loves what he leaves behind. Nobody loves this war that you are clamouring for. How many of you would actually be prepared to send your children out to war because of the treaties? Paraphrasing Churchill, war is something that is far too serious to leave it in the hands of politicians, especially politicians who have no understanding of what sacrifice and companionship means. You are moving in inexisting borders on the map. We cannot follow Ursula. The southern flank and our domestic flanks are the real threat, existential threat. You don't seem to be perceiving that.
Next speaker is Ms. Sydwell for 1 minute, please.
Yes, thank you very much, President. Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, we can't live in a world of illusions, because this debate is yet another debate about defence in the European Union and what we should be doing in order to strengthen our own security, the security of the European Union and the member states. But we seem to be staying in the same place. So we should have no illusions. As the member states, we have an obligation to strengthen the NATO alliance. And the NATO alliance is the guarantee of security for our countries and for the European Union. It's only sovereign countries, sovereign member states, that can guarantee the security of the European Union. Why is it that we seem to be deceiving ourselves about a defence union, joint procurement, a European army? The European Union has led to a drop in economic competitiveness in the European Union. So I think what we have to do is draw lessons from the mistakes that we've made in the past. Sovereign countries are the guarantee of the security of the European Union.
The next speaker is Mr. Gomard for 1 minute, please.
Madame la Présidente, Monsieur le Commissaire, chers collègues.
Madam President, too many of us believe that if we are to rearm quickly, we have to buy abroad. That is wrong. It's dangerous. How can we build a credible European defence if we turn our back on our own defence industry? If we are to turn to the US and buy more there, it's not right. The reality is that we can meet our needs. We have 6,000 defence companies. We're underutilizing that, and we need to know what we have to be able to act quickly. We have constraints, but all we need is a command. The US doesn't deliver more quickly. They actually deliver less quickly. Sometimes they don't deliver at all because their own interests are their priority. We ordered in 2024, and we won't get what we ordered in 2030, and yet Europe could deliver in 3 years. To depend on the US means that we won't have anything. Look at what is happening. Let us buy European and let us make sure that we can also have European chiefs of staff. Thank you.
Minute, please.
Tack, fru talman.
Thank you, Madam President. War is going on in Europe here and now. We see threats both from the East and the West. The message is the same, though. The international world order is under threat, and European security can no longer be taken for granted. According to President Zelensky, there are currently negotiations underway about an economic agreement between Russia and the US that might include agreements covering Ukrainian territories. This is entirely unacceptable to leave Ukraine behind. We cannot sit by and watch when the great powers carve up the world between them. It is something that goes without saying that we need to carry our own voice, and we need to show this in action. We need to continue to stand up for Greenland and Denmark, and we need to ensure that all EU countries provide at least 0.5% of their GDP in support for Ukraine. Everybody needs to contribute now for Ukraine, for Europe, and for all our security. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Tusiu for 1 minute, please.
For Romania, creating a stronger European Europe is not an abstract concept. We are in the eastern flank and we are in the first line of defense for the European Union if there is aggression from Russia. This is why we need to be clear on the direction that we choose. Yes to cooperation, yes to strengthening capacities, and yes to strengthening the eastern flank, but no to centralizing military decisions in Brussels, and no to transfers of sovereignty. The defense remains the core of competencies for the national states, and national defense that is strengthened has to be complementary to NATO. It does not have to replace it and create strategic confusion. Furthermore, we need to be fair when we are developing this. We need to develop industrial capacity, including in the places where the risks are at their highest. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Tisvo for 1 minute, please.
President, ladies and gentlemen, the world around the European Union has become unpredictable and brutal, and we see violence and blackmail. Russia is waging war against Ukraine and at the same time is also carrying out hybrid actions on the European Union, in particular in my country, Poland. And then we see that China is building up technological and military dominance. And there are those who are expecting of the European Union that they assume greater responsibility for the security of their citizens. And in this world, European defence cannot just be a statement. It has to be a real initiative and action of deterrence. We're the victims of cyber attacks and sabotage, and we have to act now. And we have to start by protecting and defending the eastern flank of the European Union. It's not just on the outskirts, as it were, of the European Union. It is the flank against those who want to attack from the east. This is what the citizens, and to the Hungarian government, we're talking about that. We're talking about money for the Hungarians and the elections, and we're not talking about Poland or the democratic European Union. That's a scandal.
Mr. Dünkel for 1 minute, please.
Commissioner, dear colleagues, Mr. Mark Rutte, citizen of Europe, has recently joked in the European Parliament about European autonomy in defense. He said it was an unrealistic dream. This is an error on our side. Turning today's dependencies into an argument against our autonomy is wrong. European autonomy does not mean leaving NATO. It's something that is missing, something that we need, a European pillar that can invest, can support security throughout time. A weak Europe is bad for the alliance, but a strong Europe is good for a strong alliance. We must not defend a status quo of dependency, of vulnerabilities. This would be irresponsible. We have all that we need. We just need good decisions to use industry, resources, and capacity together. Thank you.
The next speaker is Mr. Madison for 1 minute, please.
Thanks so much, dear colleagues. First of all, I think we all agree that this debate doesn't change anything at all, particularly. Secondly, absolutely, the defense question is very important, but we know it, the defense policy is in the hands of the member states, and the backbone of the economy in Europe is definitely Germany and also France. So it depends about them, what they are going to do. In the morning, just here, in the previous debate, we were listening and hearing a lot of tears about the climate change. Now we are listening to tears about the defense policies. But the fact is that when Germany doesn't wake up and still spending almost the same amount of money for some kind of climate policy than they are spending for the defense policy, nothing really changes. In France, Mr. Macron is talking again about the discussion need with Vladimir Putin. So we are going back to the business as usual, unfortunately. And the reality is that in Europe, there will never be the same policy in 27 member states. We are just very, very different, unfortunately. And that's why there are realistic ways that we need more and more cooperation regionally, especially like in the northeastern part of Europe, with the Baltic states, with Poland, with Finland and Sweden, because we can't really rely on the hopes in Germany or France, unfortunately. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Beke for 1 minute, please.
Thank you, President. Mr. Commissioner, collega's, de wereld staat in brand. Onze transatlantic.
The world is on fire. Our transatlantic relations are suffering, and the fact is that both in the east and in the north we're seeing problems with a war to the east. We cannot stand by and watch. Europe has to defend itself, and that requires effort. We need to speed these efforts up, though, to ensure our security and to defend our well-being. We cannot stand idle. Naturally, this places a number of demands on the European level. This is the only way that we can reduce costs and be a real dissuasive force. We need to stop talking about European defence, and we need to act jointly.
Please.
Commissioner Kubilius, ladies and gentlemen, the security backdrop of our continent is worsening, and that means that our continent has to take direct responsibility for defending our citizens. We can no longer afford to squander money and to be inefficient. Standardization, joint procurement, and interoperability have to become the rule. Defence is still within the remit of the member states, but the EU can coordinate, provide financial support, and go for industrial integration. And we really have to push forward with this. This is the pragmatic approach to a common European defence. But now we need a quantitative and qualitative leap. We have already decided, obviously, that we've been helping Ukraine, and we need, to some degree, some common debt or joint debt. And then we also have to harness AI and the green transition. If Europe is to become a power, we need to invest a lot more. And the only way to do it is to invest together.
Mr. Tonin for 1 minute, please.
President, Commissioner, colleagues, for many years, European defense has relied on the presence and capabilities of our American allies. But we must be also realistic. We cannot assume that this presence will always be there. Europe is a union of 27 member states, each with its own armed forces, its own command structures, and its own strategic priorities. This fragmentation is a vulnerability in today's hectic geopolitical environment. We must ask ourselves a simple but crucial question. How do we defend Europe in a world that demands unity and strategic clarity? Europe needs the creation of a European army placed under the European Security Council, an European army that does not replace national forces, but brings them together. An army with a common command, shared capabilities, and clear political direction. This is a long process, and for this reason, we must begin now.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Ms. Niebler for 1 minute, please.
Frau Präsidentin, President, Commissioner, dear colleagues, what is happening in Ukraine today is going to determine the fate of Europe, our freedom and our security. We can see that we can no longer count on the Transatlantic alliance as we have in the past. If you take a look at the national US strategy, that's made it perfectly clear. And this means that what we have to do is firmly and decisively support Ukraine economically, militarily. And at the same time, we have to start working on our own security architecture in the European Union. So how could we have a strengthened EU pillar in the NATO? Should we build up our own structure or build up on NATO structures? That is a debate we need to have. What about a European defence agreement? How would we deal then with partners like the United Kingdom and Norway? There are lots of questions that have to be asked and clarified. We have to act firmly, and it's not just a question of how we adopt our position here in the European Parliament. It's also how the Euro member states can assume responsibilities.
Next speaker is Ms. Wisela Lima for 1 minute, please.
We have entered a new era. The world as we knew it no longer exists. Our security depends on respect for international law, but this respect was guaranteed by the protection that we were granted by the US military. Today, we face a flouting of international law, hegemonic aspirations, and we can no longer count on the unconditional support of the US. We know this, and Russia knows this. We are out of time. Our only option is to stand united so that we can create our own dissuasive conditions. Only that can avoid a war of the kind we're seeing in Ukraine. The conditions are clear. We need sufficient military capacity, both human and material resources, military force if necessary, and above all, our adversary should also be convinced that we do have the capacity and that we will not hesitate to use it in a united fashion. We have to understand how urgent this is an act. Thank you.
We come to Catch the Eye. I have 17 requests. I cannot accommodate everyone. I will take 6 spread over the groups and based on when you ask for the floor. And I will begin with Ms. Nikolina Berschnak, C267, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Commissioner, Mr. Vice President. Our goal needs to be clear. Every euro invested in CEF has to have a dual use, strengthening the civilian connectedness and also ensuring a fast transportation of forces and equipment throughout the European Union. So we need to implement the TNT network. We need to invest in investments in order to secure connectedness of the European Union. It is not a coincidence that there will be a summit of 3 Seas initiative where this will be the main topic of discussion because of the role for security of Europe from the Adriatic Sea to the Baltics. By investing in railways, ports and logistical networks, we are strengthening our defense. It is quite clear that the security of Europe is indivisible from the connectedness.
316, please.
Thank you, Madam President.
Commissioner Kubilius, you used 2 images in your speech. First of all, Jean Monnet's quote that Europe will be born through crisis, but he didn't say it should happen spasmodically, but learning from past experiences. And I think that the Greenland case is a clear example. And now this is the first time that the EU has had to remind everyone that Article 42.7 is a collective security clause, and we reminded everyone of this. And then you talked about waking up the giant. But it's not just about waking the giant up, but it has to go beyond its comfort zone. I think that if we continue with the U.S. defense, then we'll be doing that. We need a rapid intervention force. And then finally, a vital idea, civic education for defense. We need strong leadership, and we need to explain to our citizens what we're doing and why. Thank you.
Is Mr. Giardi, seat 275, please.
The international stage is very uncertain, and that means that we have to build stronger European defense. Russia invaded Ukraine. Turkey is aggressive against Greece. We have the illegal occupation, Turkish occupation of Cyprus. Then we have Islamic terrorist organizations acting, especially in the Middle East. Illegal immigration, hybrid threats, cyber attacks, and the ever-changing geopolitical events mean that we have to act quickly. Europe can not just move ahead on the basis of hope and that things will turn out for the best. We have to invest in European defense so that Article 42.7 TEU is implemented so that we have proper European solidarity, so that Europe can act if there are attacks or threats against it. It's only if we have a common European defense framework that we can protect our freedom in the EU, that we can protect European territory. Interruption by the President.
Brandstetter, seat 189, please.
Thank you, President. Dear Commissioner Kubilius, thank you for your words, but especially thank you for your work. Finally, we are building up a European defense. And I say that coming from a neutral country. The Austrian liberals also already said in 2019 that we need a common European defense. And by the way, there's also a strong defense industry in Austria, so we will work together on that as well. But there's one more thing, there's disinformation. And today we heard again the people from the right wing are against the support for Ukraine. Yes, of course, because they are for the support of Russia, and that's dangerous for us. And I tell you one more thing. In the Financial Times, the headline was, Germany's painful estrangement from the US. We also have to talk about that. 81% of the Germans say they are afraid that the Russians want war all over. But 65% are afraid of US as well. So we have to have a strong Europe, and thank you for your work again.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Asens Lodra, seat 247, please.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, European decadence can be summed up in two images. One, von der Leyen humiliated on Trump's private golf course, and the other image is a picture of leaders in her offices taking notes, like students in detention. Trump has, since he came into power, bombed several countries, and he's threatened to attack others, Greenland. And we've seen interference in electoral processes, such as in Argentina, support for Milei, support for neo-Nazis elsewhere. Trump wants to break up the European Union, but also NATO and the UN. What else does he need to do in order for us to understand this as a threat to our security? How many borders did Hitler have to cross before the world understood that they needed to put a stop to him? Trump has said he doesn't believe in the UN, but one of the threats comes from within.
Catch the eye is Ms. Konečka, seat 845, please.
Děkuji, paní předsedající.
Thank you, Madam Chair. After this discussion, I'm asking myself, will there ever be a situation when we stop believing that creating stronger defense or militarism will solve all our problems? We've been arming for all those years. Look at how many social spending cuts that have been made to pay for the weapons. And how the military complex increased. The social gaps have increased, and you made all these a dirty word, and our so-called ally can threaten us. It is not about how many aircrafts we get. This strategy needs to change. We pretend that billions for arms will solve our problems. You have made this into a union of military complex, industrial complex. Let us bury our sword. Don't play Rambo to follow the script of the weapons industry.
I will now give the floor back to the Commission and Commissioner Kubilius, but I will ask you to take your seats and not speak to each other in the chamber right now in order to respect the speakers. Please, the floor is yours, Commissioner.
Madam Chair, dear colleagues, thank you very much for this really very great debate. It is clear from our discussion that we agree we must very rapidly take responsibility for our defense or for the future of peace on the European continent. And we will be able to take this responsibility if we shall be able to make important decisions and agreements. And I urge really Parliament to speed up with our trilogues, because Putin will not wait until the last trilogue to test us. European independence does not mean going solo. It means beefing up our strengths within NATO, so we can only defend ourselves, but also better support our allies. And we need to answer very simple questions. If our transatlantic partners are asking us to take responsibility on our shoulders for conventional European defense, do we agree with that request? If we agree, let's be very practical in our discussions. And let's answer the questions how we shall replace their resources on the European continent, starting from strategic enablers, then 100,000 rapid reaction troops, which they are keeping on the European continent, and what will be our defense plans according to NATO doctrines. And the European Parliament is the best place to have those very serious and very important discussions. The Member States are responsible for defense, so we ask them to lead and take charge of European defense. But we need to move forward in the same direction, not 27 different ones. Our biggest weakness, fragmentation and division. Our greatest strength, unity. The common market is our strength in the global economy. Common defense will be our strength in a world of power. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very, very much, Commissioner. And dear colleagues, thank you for your patience. The debate is closed and the sitting is suspended, and it will resume in a few minutes with the address by Annalena Baerbock, President of the UN General Assembly. Thank you.